The phone rang at 3 in the morning, jolting me from sleep with that particular urgency that makes your heart stop. I fumbled for my cell, seeing an international number I didn't recognize. When I answered, my 16-year-old daughter, Sophia's terrified voice cut through the static like a knife through my soul. She was sobbing, barely coherent, stranded alone in Guatemala City without her passport. My wealthy sister Carmen and her 2 adult children had deliberately abandoned her at a dangerous market district after what they claimed was an educational cultural trip. As Sophia's words sank in, my world completely shattered, realizing my precious daughter was trapped in a State Department designated Do Not Travel country. My hands shook as I immediately dialed Carmen's mansion in Beverly Hills, demanding answers about how my daughter ended up abandoned in one of the most dangerous places on earth. Bradley answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick with alcohol and something far worse. He was laughing. Actually laughing as he described in vivid, sickening detail how they had orchestrated this nightmare. Oh, that was absolutely priceless, Aunt Isabella. Bradley slurred into the phone, his 22-year-old voice dripping with malicious glee. We told little Sophia to wait at this crowded market while we supposedly bought some authentic Guatemalan souvenirs. The look on her face when she realized we weren't coming back was pure comedy gold. My stomach lurched as he continued describing their calculated cruelty. They had driven away from the market windows, down music blasting, celebrating their successful abandonment of a 16-year-old girl in a country plagued by gang violence and political instability. Bradley recounted how they stopped at a nearby restaurant to toast their success, taking selfies while Sophia searched frantically for them in increasingly dangerous neighborhoods. "Bradley, what have you done?" I whispered, my voice barely audible through my shock and growing rage. Before he could respond, I heard scuffling as someone grabbed the phone. Jasmine's voice came through next, equally intoxicated and cruel. At 20, my niece possessed a vindictive streak I'd never fully comprehended until this moment. "You should have seen her face, Aunt Isabella." Jasmine giggled with sickening delight. When she realized we actually left her there, she looked like a lost puppy. It was honestly hilarious watching her run around asking random people if they'd seen us. My breathing became shallow and rapid as the full scope of their betrayal crystallized. These weren't children playing a thoughtless prank. These were adults who had methodically planned the abandonment of my daughter in a foreign country notorious for violence against tourists. "How could you leave her without her passport?" I managed to ask, though part of me already dreaded the answer. Carmen's voice suddenly filled the line cold and calculating in a way that made my blood freeze. "Isabella, you spoil that girl beyond belief. This little adventure will teach her some much-needed character. She's too soft, too dependent on you for everything. Character building." I exploded my maternal instincts, overriding my shock. "You abandoned a minor in Guatemala without identification documents." Carmen's laugh was sharp and completely devoid of warmth. "She'll figure it out. Resourcefulness is a valuable life skill you've never bothered teaching her." The conversation took an even more disturbing turn, as Carmen revealed this wasn't their first time orchestrating such cruelty. She casually mentioned abandoning their cousin Derek in Mexico 2 years prior, leaving their elderly aunt stranded at a casino in Atlantic City, and various other incidents of calculated family abuse disguised as character-building exercises. "You're all sick," I breathed, realizing the depth of their coordinated malice. "We blocked her phone and canceled her credit cards," Bradley chimed in cheerfully. "She's completely on her own now, sink or swim right." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in complete disbelief. My sister and her children had just confessed to intentionally abandoning my daughter in one of the most dangerous countries in Central America without resources or identification as some twisted form of entertainment. But the worst revelation was still coming. As I frantically tried calling back, a text message arrived from an unknown number containing photos. Pictures of Sophia at the Guatemala City airport, obviously taken without her knowledge. Pictures of her passport being handed over to an official-looking man in uniform. Pictures that prove this wasn't a spontaneous, cruel joke, but a carefully orchestrated plan. Carmen had bribed local officials to confiscate Sophia's passport, ensuring she couldn't simply walk into the American embassy and request emergency travel documents. This wasn't just abandonment. This was kidnapping with international implications, and my family had just made my daughter's rescue virtually impossible. Dawn was breaking over Los Angeles as I rushed to my computer, desperately searching for emergency contact information for American citizens stranded abroad. The State Department's emergency hotline connected me to an automated system that transferred me through 6 different departments before finally reaching a human being who sounded like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but Guatemala has experienced significant political instability recently," the representative explained with bureaucratic detachment. "Most consular services have been suspended indefinitely due to safety concerns for embassy personnel." My heart sank further as she continued explaining the limited options available. Without Sophia's passport, embassy officials couldn't verify her identity or provide emergency travel documents. The process could take weeks even under normal circumstances, and these were decidedly not normal circumstances. "But she's 16 years old and completely alone," I pleaded, hearing my voice crack with desperation. "I understand, ma'am, but our hands are tied without proper documentation. Has she filed a police report about the missing passport?" I wanted to scream that the passport wasn't missing, but deliberately stolen by my own family members. But explaining that level of betrayal seemed impossible over the phone. Instead, I provided every detail I could remember about Sophia's appearance, her travel itinerary, and the circumstances of her abandonment. Next, I called my ex-husband, Marcus, Sophia's father, hoping his military connections might provide some avenue for help. The call went straight to voicemail, and when I contacted his unit, they informed me he was deployed on a classified mission somewhere in Eastern Europe and wouldn't be reachable for at least 2 weeks. My savings account balance showed $837, not nearly enough for emergency international travel bribes for corrupt officials or hiring professional extraction services. I'd been living paycheck to paycheck since my divorce 3 years ago, and the modest life insurance payout from my father's death had gone entirely towards Sophia's college savings fund. Desperation drove me to call my best friend Rachel, but her voice carried its own strain when she answered. "Isabella, I want to help. I really do, but we just found out the bank is foreclosing on our house next month. I barely have enough to keep my own kids fed right now." The Red Cross proved equally disappointing. Their representative was sympathetic, but explained their resources were stretched impossibly thin due to recent hurricane damage in Puerto Rico and earthquake relief efforts in Alaska. They could add Sophia's case to a waiting list, but immediate action was impossible. Every phone call led to another dead end, another bureaucratic wall, another helpful suggestion that required resources I simply didn't possess. International rescue organizations required substantial fees up front. Private security firms quoted prices starting at $50,000. Legal aid societies suggested I file complaints that would take months to process. But the most devastating blow came when I started calling extended family members for support, only to discover that Carmen had been systematically poisoning those relationships for years. My cousin Jennifer hung up on me after coldly stating that Carmen had warned her I might call with wild stories about my mental health issues. Uncle Robert was slightly more diplomatic, but equally unsupportive. "Isabella, Carmen told us about your problems since the divorce. Maybe this situation with Sophia isn't as serious as you think. Sometimes grief and stress can make people imagine threats that aren't really there." Call after call revealed the same pattern. Carmen had spent years carefully planting seeds of doubt about my stability, my parenting abilities, and my relationship with reality. She'd apparently shared fabricated stories about my supposed drinking problem, my alleged financial irresponsibility, and my purported tendency toward dramatic exaggeration. My own mother, Patricia, was the final and most crushing disappointment. When I called her sobbing and desperate, she sighed heavily before responding. Isabella Honey Carmen told me you might call with some elaborate story about Sophia being in danger. She said you've been struggling with depression and paranoia since the divorce, and that you might create emergencies for attention. Mom, this is real. Sophia called me from Guatemala. Carmen showed me the photos from their wonderful cultural trip. Sophia looked happy and healthy. Maybe you misunderstood something Sophia said, or maybe this is your way of trying to get back at Carmen for being more successful than you. The phone slipped from my numb fingers as I realized the full scope of Carmen's manipulation. She hadn't just abandoned my daughter in a dangerous foreign country. She'd spent years systematically destroying my support network, ensuring that when her ultimate betrayal came, I'd have nowhere to turn and no one who'd believe my version of events. I was completely alone, facing an impossible situation with no resources, no allies, and a family that had been turned against me by a master manipulator who just committed what amounted to kidnapping for entertainment. 6 hours after her first call, Sophia managed to contact me again from an internet cafe in a questionable part of Guatemala City. Her voice was hoarse from crying and exhaustion, but she forced herself to speak clearly as she described the hellish reality of her situation. Mom, I've been sleeping in the courtyard of this old church because every hotel I tried refused to take an unaccompanied minor. She began her words tumbling out rapidly as if she feared losing the connection. The priest here, Father Miguel, doesn't speak much English, but he's been sharing food with me from his family's dinner. I think he has 5 kids of his own, and they barely have enough, but they keep giving me portions anyway. My heart broke imagining my daughter, who'd never spent a night away from home without extensive planning and safety measures, trying to survive on the charity of strangers in one of Central America's most dangerous cities. Sophia, sweetheart, tell me about your surroundings. Are you safe right now? Her voice dropped to a whisper. There are gang members, Mom. They wear specific colored bandanas, and they've been asking people about the American girl. I heard them talking yesterday, and even though I don't speak Spanish very well, I understood enough to know they were describing me. Father Miguel keeps telling me to stay close to the church, but even here isn't completely safe. She described witnessing 2 violent robberies in broad daylight, seeing blood on sidewalks that no one bothered cleaning, and hearing gunshots echo through the narrow streets at night. The Guatemala City she was experiencing bore no resemblance to the sanitized tourist destinations Carmen had probably researched while planning this nightmare. But Mom, there's something else, something worse than just being abandoned. My blood chilled as Sophia continued. 3 days before we were supposed to leave for this trip, I couldn't sleep and went downstairs for water. Bradley and Jasmine were in the kitchen with Aunt Carmen, and they didn't see me. They were talking about teaching the spoiled American girl a lesson. Bradley said something about how you needed to learn what real consequences felt like, and Jasmine laughed about how this would show you that your perfect little princess wasn't so special after all. The calculated nature of their cruelty became even clearer as Sophia recounted more of what she'd overheard. Carmen had specifically researched Guatemala because of its current political instability and reduced American diplomatic presence. She'd chosen the Market District for the abandonment because it was known for gang activity and police corruption. They planned this for months, Mom. Aunt Carmen kept talking about how this would finally put you in your place, how you'd always acted like you were better than the rest of the family just because you went to college and had a career. But the most shocking revelation was still coming. Mom, I need to tell you something else I discovered, and you're not going to believe it. Sophia's voice steadied with determined clarity. When we were at Aunt Carmen's house the night before leaving, I accidentally saw some papers on her desk while looking for a phone charger. There were bank statements and legal documents that didn't make sense to me then, but now I think they were stealing from great-grandma Eleanor's estate. My grandmother Eleanor had died 2 years ago, leaving a substantial inheritance that was supposed to be distributed among her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Carmen, as the eldest grandchild and executor of the estate, had handled all the financial arrangements. Sophia's college fund was supposed to receive $50,000 from that inheritance. The papers showed payments to something called Pacific Holdings LLC, and there were references to real estate investments that earned Carmen hundreds of thousands of dollars. But Mom, I never saw any money from great-grandma's estate. Did you? I had assumed the estate was smaller than expected, or that legal fees had consumed most of the value. Carmen had provided vague explanations about market downturns and legal complications that I'd accepted because I trusted my sister and didn't want to appear greedy by questioning her handling of family finances. Sophia, do you think this abandonment is connected to the money somehow? I think Aunt Carmen realized I saw those papers, and maybe she's worried I'll tell you about them when I get home. This whole trip might have been her way of making sure I never get the chance to tell you what I discovered. The implications hit me like physical blows. Carmen hadn't just stolen my daughter's college fund. She'd abandoned Sophia in a dangerous foreign country to prevent exposure of her financial crimes. This wasn't just cruelty for entertainment anymore. This was eliminating a witness to federal-level embezzlement. Mom, I'm scared, but I'm also angry. Aunt Carmen thinks she can just throw me away like garbage to protect her own crimes. But I remember details from those papers, and if we ever get out of this situation, I want to make sure she faces consequences for what she's done to our family. Despite her terror and exhaustion, my 16-year-old daughter was showing more courage and moral clarity than the adults who were supposed to protect her. But courage wouldn't shield her from the very real dangers surrounding her in Guatemala City, and I was no closer to finding a way to bring her home safely. By the second day of Sophia's abandonment, I had liquidated everything I could convert to immediate cash. My engagement ring from my marriage to Marcus went to a pawn shop for $300. My grandmother's antique jewelry collection brought another $400 from an estate buyer. I listed my car on every online platform, simultaneously accepting the first lowball offer of $2,000 just to have immediate funds. My furniture followed the same pattern. The dining room set Marcus and I had saved for during our first year of marriage sold for $800. My bedroom furniture, kitchen appliances, and electronics disappeared to various buyers who sensed my desperation and offered accordingly insulting amounts. By noon, my apartment looked like I was moving out, which in many ways I was. The total from liquidating my possessions came to $6,200, still nowhere near enough for professional extraction services, but possibly sufficient for bribes and emergency travel if I could find the right connections. Local news stations proved completely uninterested in the story. Channel 7's assignment editor listened politely for 30 seconds before interrupting. Ma'am, this sounds like a family dispute that got out of hand. We don't typically cover custody disagreements or teenage runaways. My daughter didn't run away. She was abandoned by family members in a dangerous foreign country. Has she been kidnapped by strangers? Is this connected to drug cartels or terrorism? When I explained that my own sister and her children were responsible, the editor's interest evaporated completely. Channel 4 and Channel 11 provided similar responses, treating the situation as a domestic matter unworthy of coverage. My supervisor at the marketing firm where I worked part-time was less understanding than I'd hoped. When I requested emergency leave to deal with the crisis, she reminded me that I'd already used my allocated family leave time when my father died 6 months earlier. Isabella, I sympathize with your situation, but we have client deadlines that can't be postponed. If you don't return to work by tomorrow, I'll have to consider this job abandonment. Losing my income while facing mounting rescue expenses seemed impossible to bear, but I couldn't abandon Sophia to focus on keeping a job that barely covered my monthly rent anyway. The American Embassy in Guatemala City required a minimum 2-week waiting period for emergency documentation, assuming they could verify Sophia's identity through alternative means. The consular officer I spoke with explained that without her passport, birth certificate, or social security card proving her American citizenship might take significantly longer. Even if we can establish her identity, ma'am, she would need a legal guardian present to sign for emergency travel documents. Are you planning to travel to Guatemala? I couldn't travel to Guatemala without putting myself at risk of the same abandonment Sophia was facing. Carmen clearly had connections with corrupt officials, and nothing prevented her from having me detained or disappeared if I entered the country. Extended family members continued treating me like an unreliable narrator of my own daughter's crisis. My cousin Margaret actually laughed when I called asking for financial help. Isabella Carmen warned us you might try something like this. She said you've been having money problems and might come up with elaborate stories to guilt family members into giving you cash. Margaret, I can prove Sophia is stranded in Guatemala. I have photos, phone records, everything. Photos can be faked, Isabella. Carmen showed us pictures from their lovely cultural tour. Sophia looked perfectly happy and healthy. Maybe you should consider getting some professional help for whatever you're going through. Uncle Thomas was more direct in his rejection. Your sister has always been responsible and level-headed, while you've made questionable decisions since your divorce. I'm not getting involved in whatever drama you're creating. My own mother delivered the most devastating blow when I called begging for help accessing my father's life insurance money that she'd inherited. Isabella, I spoke with Carmen this morning, and she's very concerned about your mental state. She thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown and imagining threats that don't exist. I can't give you money based on what might be delusions. Mom, call Sophia yourself. Call the number I'm giving you and hear her voice. Carmen explained that you might have convinced Sophia to participate in some kind of scheme for attention or money. I'm not enabling whatever this is. The systematic destruction of my credibility was so complete, so expertly orchestrated, that even providing evidence seemed to reinforce their belief that I was fabricating everything. Carmen had spent years building the foundation for this moment, ensuring that when she struck, I'd have no allies and no resources to fight back. But the most chilling discovery came when I researched private security firms that specialized in international extractions. The receptionist at Worldwide Security Solutions asked for basic information about the situation before transferring me to an operative. Ma'am, we're familiar with this type of scenario. Your sister's organization has contacts with several extraction services, but they specialize in emergency removal of wealthy Americans from dangerous situations. The fact that she hasn't used these resources to help your daughter suggests this abandonment is intentional and permanent. What do you mean her organization? Carmen Whitfield maintains business relationships with private military contractors, international security firms, and various offshore financial services. She could have had your daughter safely extracted within 6 hours of the abandonment if she'd wanted to. The fact that she hasn't indicates this situation serves her purposes in some way. I hung up the phone, realizing that Carmen wasn't just cruel and vindictive. She was connected to international criminal networks with resources I couldn't begin to compete against. My daughter wasn't just abandoned, she was being held captive by proxy with professional-level security, preventing her rescue while maintaining plausible deniability about Carmen's involvement. The walls were closing in from every direction, and I was running out of time, money, and options to save my daughter from a nightmare that was revealing itself to be far more complex and dangerous than simple family cruelty. On the 3rd day of my nightmare, desperation drove me to contact every journalist, blogger, and social media influencer I could find who had ever covered international child endangerment cases. Most ignored my messages, but one response changed everything. Maria Santos, a Guatemalan-American investigative journalist based in Los Angeles, called me within hours of receiving my email. Isabella, I know exactly what your daughter is facing because I lived through something similar 2 years ago. Maria said, her voice carrying a weight of shared trauma that immediately connected us. My 15-year-old daughter, Carmen, was kidnapped by human traffickers while visiting relatives in Guatemala City. The police told me she was probably dead within 48 hours, but I refused to accept that. Maria's story unfolded like a roadmap of horrors I was only beginning to understand. Her daughter had disappeared from a crowded market, similar to where Sophia had been abandoned. Local authorities were either corrupt or overwhelmed, offering no real assistance to desperate American parents. International rescue organizations operated within legal frameworks that moved too slowly for children facing immediate danger. But I built relationships with people who operate outside those official channels, Maria continued. Former smugglers who got out of the business, church workers who help trafficking victims, underground networks that exist specifically to extract endangered Americans from situations exactly like your daughter's. As Maria described her connections, I realized she'd created the very support system I desperately needed. More importantly, she understood the psychological and logistical challenges of fighting for a child's life against overwhelming odds. Isabella, there's something else you need to understand about your situation. Based on your description of your sister's resources and connections, this abandonment isn't random cruelty. Someone with Carmen's apparent wealth and international contacts doesn't accidentally leave a family member stranded. This was planned with specific purposes in mind. Maria's investigation skills quickly uncovered information that explained Carmen's true motivations. Using her journalist credentials and underground sources, she discovered that Carmen had been under FBI surveillance for suspected involvement in international artifact smuggling operations. Your sister has been importing pre-Columbian artifacts from Guatemala and other Central American countries, falsifying documentation to make them appear legally acquired, Maria explained during our second phone conversation. These operations require local contacts, corrupt officials, and regular travel to establish trust with suppliers. The pieces began forming a terrifying picture. Carmen's cultural trips weren't family bonding experiences, but business cover for illegal antiquities trafficking. Family members served as unwitting mules, carrying small artifacts hidden in souvenirs or luggage, while Carmen maintained plausible deniability about her direct involvement. Your daughter may have accidentally witnessed or photographed something during previous family gatherings that could expose Carmen's entire operation, Maria suggested. If Sophia saw meetings with buyers, financial transactions, or storage areas for smuggled goods, she represents an existential threat to a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. Maria's contacts confirmed details that made my blood run cold. Carmen had been living far beyond her legitimate income for years, financing her Beverly Hills lifestyle through various illegal schemes, including antiquities, smuggling, identity theft, and financial fraud, targeting elderly relatives. The abandonment serves multiple purposes, Maria explained with chilling clarity. If Sophia disappears permanently in Guatemala, Carmen eliminates a potential witness while creating a tragic family story that generates sympathy and deflects suspicion from her criminal activities. But Maria's most devastating revelation concerned the scope of Carmen's criminal network. Her sources indicated that Carmen's associates had been hired to ensure Sophia never returned to the United States, using methods that would appear to be random gang violence rather than targeted elimination. Isabella, your daughter, isn't just abandoned. She's been marked for permanent disappearance by people who kill witnesses professionally. We're not dealing with family cruelty anymore. This is a contract killing disguised as abandonment. The urgency of Maria's voice conveyed the life-or-death nature of our timeline. My contacts estimate we have maybe 72 hours before Carmen's associates complete their assignment. After that, Sophia becomes another unfortunate American tourist who fell victim to Guatemala's violence. Maria's willingness to help came from a place of shared understanding that no parent should face such horror alone. Her own daughter had been recovered through the same underground network she was now offering to activate for Sophia, though the experience had changed both of them permanently. I can't guarantee success, Isabella, but I can guarantee that doing nothing means losing Sophia forever. Are you prepared to trust people who operate outside the law to save your daughter from people who are definitely operating outside the law? For the first time since Sophia's first terrified phone call, I felt a glimmer of hope mixed with the terrible understanding that saving my daughter would require entering a world of international crime, underground networks, and moral compromises I'd never imagined making. But as Maria outlined her plan to connect me with her extraction contacts, I realized that Carmen had made one crucial miscalculation. In her arrogance, she'd assumed I would remain isolated and helpless, following legal channels that she'd already corrupted or neutralized. She never anticipated that her crimes would connect me with someone who'd already learned to fight monsters on their own terms. "Maria, what do you need from me to make this happen?" "Everything you own, every favor you can call in, and absolute trust in people whose methods you might not want to know about in detail. But most importantly, you need to understand that once we start this process, there's no going back to your old life. Rescuing Sophia means exposing Carmen's entire operation, and that makes you a target too." I didn't hesitate. "Whatever it takes to bring my daughter home." Maria's underground contacts located Sophia within hours, using methods I decided not to question too closely. She was hiding in an abandoned textile factory 3 miles from the church, having fled when gang members began asking Father Miguel pointed questions about the American girl he'd been sheltering. "She's dehydrated, terrified, and showing signs of food poisoning from contaminated water," reported Carlos Maria's primary contact in Guatemala City. His voice carried the efficiency of someone accustomed to life-threatening emergencies. "The good news is she's alive and conscious. The bad news is she's in an area controlled by Los Escorpiones gang, and they're actively searching for her." Carlos explained that Sophia had been forced to abandon the church when corrupt police officers arrived, asking Father Miguel about unregistered foreign minors. The priest, recognizing the danger, had quietly directed her toward a network of safe houses used by human trafficking survivors, but she'd become separated from her guides during a police raid. "She's been moving every few hours, staying ahead of search teams, but she can't keep this up much longer." Carlos continued, "The gang members aren't just looking for her randomly. They've been paid to find a specific American girl, and they have her description and photographs." Maria's connections revealed the professional nature of Carmen's operation. Her criminal associates had provided detailed intelligence about Sophia's appearance behavior patterns and likely hiding places. This wasn't a casual search by opportunistic criminals. It was a coordinated manhunt by professionals who were being compensated for results. "We have a 24-hour window before their net closes completely," Maria explained as she outlined our extraction plan. "Carlos has connections with reformed smugglers who now help trafficking victims escape, but they'll need payment up front and guarantees about their own safety." The financial requirements were staggering. $15,000 for the extraction team, $5,000 for bribes to get past checkpoints, $3,000 for emergency medical care, and another $7,000 for safe passage to a location where Sophia could receive legitimate consular assistance. "I have about $6,000 left from liquidating everything I owned," I told Maria, my voice cracking with desperation. "Then we need to find another $24,000 in the next 12 hours, or your daughter dies." In desperation, I mortgaged my apartment to a predatory lender who specialized in emergency cash for people facing immediate crises. The paperwork was completed in 3 hours, providing $18,000 at an interest rate that would destroy my financial future. But financial ruin seemed insignificant compared to losing Sophia forever. But even as I secured funding, Carmen was actively sabotaging our rescue efforts. Maria's contacts reported that someone with intimate knowledge of our plans had been alerting Guatemalan authorities about suspicious American activities in areas where Sophia was hiding. "Your sister has been monitoring your financial transactions and phone calls," Carlos reported during an encrypted call. "She knows about the mortgage, she knows about Maria's involvement, and she's been feeding information to corrupt officials who are now treating our extraction team as potential criminals." Carmen's reach extended far beyond what I'd imagined. She had contacts within international banking systems who could track my emergency financial moves. She had relationships with Guatemalan officials who could classify our rescue attempts as illegal foreign interference. Most terrifyingly, she had connections with criminal organizations who could make both Sophia and me disappear permanently, while maintaining plausible deniability about her involvement. She's not just trying to eliminate Sophia as a witness, Maria realized during one of our increasingly frantic strategy sessions. She's trying to eliminate you too. If both of you disappear in Guatemala while attempting an illegal rescue operation, Carmen becomes the grieving sister who lost family members to foreign violence. The psychological warfare was as sophisticated as the physical threats. Carmen had crafted a narrative where my attempts to save Sophia appeared reckless and potentially criminal, while her own actions appeared reasonable and protective. If our rescue attempt failed, she would emerge as the responsible family member who had warned everyone about my unstable behavior. But Maria's network had one advantage Carmen hadn't anticipated. The reformed smugglers and trafficking rescue specialists had spent years evading exactly the kind of corrupt officials and criminal organizations Carmen was using against us. They knew how to move through Guatemala's underground networks without triggering the surveillance systems she relied upon. We're going to extract Sophia using routes that Carmen's people don't know about, Carlos explained during our final planning session. But you need to understand that once we move, everyone involved becomes a target. If this operation fails, Carmen's associates won't just kill Sophia. They'll kill everyone who tried to help her. The weight of involving innocent people in mortal danger because of my family's criminal behavior was almost overwhelming. But Maria's determination kept me focused on what mattered most. Isabella, my daughter, survived because people were willing to risk everything to save a child they'd never met. She reminded me when I wavered about accepting their help. Sometimes decent people have to fight monsters, and sometimes the only way to win is by becoming as ruthless as the people you're fighting against. As our extraction team prepared to move into position, I received one final call from Carmen, her voice carrying a coldness that made my skin crawl. Isabella, I know what you're planning, and I want you to understand something very clearly. Sophia's situation can be resolved peacefully if you stop interfering and accept that some lessons need to be learned the hard way. But if you continue down this path, you'll lose much more than just your daughter. Or, Carmen, she's your niece. How can you threaten to kill a 16-year-old girl? I'm not threatening anyone, Isabella. I'm simply explaining that Guatemala is a dangerous country where American tourists sometimes disappear despite everyone's best efforts to protect them. Accidents happen especially to people who make poor decisions about who to trust. The line went dead, leaving me with the absolute certainty that Carmen viewed Sophia's death not as a tragic consequence of her criminal behavior, but as a necessary business expense to protect her illegal empire. Just as Carlos and his extraction team were moving into position to reach Sophia, my mother Patricia called with news that shattered what remained of my faith in family loyalty. Isabella, I need to tell you something that might upset you, but I think you should know that Carmen is genuinely worried about your mental state. Patricia began, her voice carrying that particular tone people use when they believe they're being helpful while delivering devastating news. My stomach dropped as I realized what was coming. Mom, what did you do? Carmen called me this morning very concerned about some dangerous people you've apparently become involved with. She said you've been talking to criminals and smugglers and that you might be planning something that could get both you and Sophia hurt. The words hit me like physical blows as I understood that my own mother had been feeding information about our rescue operation directly to Carmen. Every detail I'd shared with Patricia during desperate phone calls seeking emotional support had been passed along to the very person orchestrating my daughter's endangerment. She showed me some very disturbing information about this Maria person you've been talking to. Patricia continued, apparently unaware that she was describing her own betrayal of her daughter and granddaughter. Did you know she's been arrested for associating with known criminals? Carmen thinks she might be trying to exploit your situation for her own purposes. Maria's criminal associations were the reformed smugglers and trafficking survivors who formed her underground rescue network, but Carmen had presented this information to make Maria appear dangerous and manipulative rather than heroic. "Mom, did you tell Carmen about the mortgage I took on my apartment?" "Well, yes, I was worried about you making such drastic financial decisions while you're obviously not thinking clearly. Carmen said she might be able to help if you were willing to accept her guidance instead of trusting these questionable people." The scope of Patricia's betrayal became clear as she continued describing her conversations with Carmen. She had provided details about Maria's contacts, the timeline of our rescue operation, the financial arrangements I'd made, and even the specific routes Carlos planned to use for Sophia's extraction. "Carmen's people have been raiding safe houses all night," Maria informed me in a panicked call minutes after I hung up with Patricia. "They knew exactly where to look, which means someone with intimate knowledge of our operation has been feeding them intelligence. 3 of the safe houses Carlos's network used for trafficking survivors had been raided by corrupt police within hours of each other. The families who ran those safe houses had been arrested on fabricated charges, effectively dismantling a rescue network that had saved hundreds of lives over the past decade. Your mother wasn't just giving Carmen information about your daughter's rescue," Carlos reported grimly. "She was providing intelligence that Carmen used to destroy infrastructure that helped other endangered children escape Guatemala. The betrayal went far beyond family dysfunction into active collaboration with child endangerment on an international scale. Patricia's willingness to believe Carmen's manipulation had made her complicit in not just Sophia's potential murder, but the destruction of resources that protected other vulnerable children. "Isabella, we need to abort the operation," Carlos advised during an emergency strategy call. "Too many of our assets have been compromised. Attempting extraction now would likely result in everyone involved being killed or disappeared." But Maria refused to accept defeat. "There's one route Carmen's people don't know about, because we've never used it before. It's more dangerous and less reliable, but it might be our only chance." The alternative extraction route involved moving Sophia through areas controlled by rival gangs, who had no business relationship with Carmen's associates. The downside was that these gangs were unpredictable and extremely violent, treating American civilians as potential kidnapping targets rather than customers to be protected. We'd be trading the certainty of Carmen's people finding Sophia for the possibility that other criminals might help her if we pay them enough, Carlos explained. "It's not a good choice, but it might be the only choice we have left." As we debated impossible options, I received another devastating revelation about Patricia's cooperation with Carmen. Phone records Maria obtained through her journalist contacts showed that Patricia had been providing Carmen with detailed information about my activities for over 6 months long before Sophia's abandonment. "Your mother has been reporting your financial struggles, your work problems, your dating attempts, everything," Maria explained as she reviewed the call logs. "Carmen's been building a psychological profile of your vulnerabilities for months, planning this operation in detail. Patricia's betrayal wasn't spontaneous concern for my welfare. It was systematic collaboration with Carmen's long-term plan to isolate and destroy me. Every personal detail I'd shared with my mother during vulnerable moments had been weaponized against me by my sister." But the most chilling discovery came when Maria's sources revealed the true scope of Carmen's criminal operations. The antiquities smuggling was only one aspect of an international network that included human trafficking identity, theft, money laundering, and contract killing services for wealthy clients. "Your sister isn't just a family member who went bad," Maria explained with growing horror. "She's a high-level criminal operator who specializes in eliminating witnesses and obstacles to her business interests. Sophia's abandonment follows the exact same pattern Carmen has used to dispose of at least 7 other people over the past 5 years. Previous victims included a business partner who discovered Carmen's money laundering operations, an accountant who questioned irregularities in her financial records, and 3 elderly relatives whose estate funds Carmen had diverted to her criminal enterprises. The family abandonment method allows Carmen to eliminate threats while maintaining plausible deniability and even generating sympathy as a grieving relative," Maria continued. "She's perfected a system for murder that looks like tragic accidents or random foreign violence. As this information sank in, I realized that saving Sophia wasn't just about rescuing my daughter from immediate danger. It was about stopping a serial killer who used family relationships and international travel to commit perfect murders disguised as unfortunate accidents. But with our primary extraction routes compromised and my own mother actively working against us, the chances of saving Sophia while exposing Carmen's crimes seemed almost impossibly remote. Maria's decision to break the story internationally through her network of investigative journalists created the first crack in Carmen's carefully constructed facade. Within hours, major news outlets were covering the abandonment of an American minor in Guatemala, complete with documentation of Carmen's criminal activities and connections. The story gained immediate traction on social media, with hashtags like Save Sophia and Family Betrayal trending across multiple platforms. International human rights organizations issued statements condemning the use of child endangerment as a tool of family manipulation. Foreign correspondents in Guatemala City began investigating the corruption that allowed American citizens to disappear with official assistance. But Carmen's response demonstrated the sophistication of her criminal network and political connections. Rather than denying the allegations, she launched a coordinated counter-narrative that painted me as an unstable woman exploiting international concern for personal gain. Her legal team released a statement claiming I was suffering from severe mental health issues stemming from my divorce and financial problems. They produced fabricated psychological evaluations, allegedly documenting my paranoid delusions, tendency toward dramatic exaggeration, and history of making false accusations against family members. Ms. Isabella Hartley has a documented history of creating elaborate fictional scenarios when facing personal stress, Carmen's attorney announced during a press conference. The allegations against Mrs. Carmen Whitfield appear to be another manifestation of Ms. Hartley's ongoing psychological crisis. The fabricated evidence was sophisticated enough to confuse legitimate media outlets. Carmen had apparently been planning this defense for months, creating false medical records, manipulating family photographs to suggest I was unstable or intoxicated during gatherings, and obtaining sworn statements from relatives who believed her version of events. International adoption agencies, where Carmen had connections, issued statements questioning my fitness as a parent. Financial institutions where she maintained accounts produced records suggesting I had been attempting to defraud family members. Educational institutions where she had influence questioned my professional credentials and mental stability. She's using the same techniques governments use for character assassination, Maria observed as we watched Carmen's publicity campaign unfold. This isn't just personal manipulation anymore. This is professional-level psychological warfare designed to destroy your credibility completely. The situation became even more complex when the FBI announced they were investigating both the child endangerment allegations and the international smuggling claims. While this seemed positive, initially Carmen's connections within law enforcement quickly became apparent. Federal agents are treating this as a custody dispute between unstable relatives rather than an international criminal conspiracy, Maria reported after speaking with her sources. Carmen's people have convinced investigators that you're using false smuggling allegations to gain advantage in a family conflict. Carmen's political connections extended further than I'd imagined. She had relationships with congressional staff members who specialized in international trade issues, giving her advance warning about federal investigations. She maintained business relationships with former State Department officials who could influence how diplomatic resources were allocated for American citizens abroad. Most devastatingly, she had cultivated friendships with federal judges who might eventually preside over any criminal cases arising from her activities. Carmen hadn't just built a criminal empire, she'd constructed a political protection system that insulated her from consequences. Your sister has been planning for this moment for years, Maria explained as the scope of Carmen's preparation became clear. She's created multiple layers of legal protection, political influence, and social cover that make prosecuting her almost impossible. But Carmen had made one critical miscalculation. Her confidence in her protection systems led her to underestimate the power of international media attention focused specifically on child endangerment. While she could manipulate domestic law enforcement and political processes, she couldn't control foreign governments or international organizations that were beginning to investigate Guatemala's role in endangering American children. The Guatemalan government, facing international criticism about corruption and child trafficking, announced their own investigation into the circumstances of Sophia's abandonment. European Union representatives issued statements about American criminal organizations exploiting Central American instability. United Nations human rights monitors added Guatemala to their priority investigation list. Carmen's criminal network depends on operating beneath international attention, Carlos reported from Guatemala City. The media coverage is forcing corrupt officials to distance themselves from her operations because continuing to help her now risks their own positions. For the first time since the nightmare began, Carmen's advantages were becoming liabilities. Her political connections became evidence of corruption. Her financial resources drew attention to money laundering. Her international travel patterns revealed smuggling routes and criminal partnerships. But even as Carmen's empire began showing cracks, Sophia remained trapped in Guatemala City, moving between increasingly dangerous hiding spots, while professional killers continued searching for her with detailed intelligence about her location and activities. The investigation is good news for eventually bringing Carmen to justice, Maria acknowledged during one of our increasingly desperate planning sessions. But it doesn't solve the immediate problem of keeping your daughter alive long enough to benefit from that justice. Carmen's desperation was beginning to show. Unable to control the international narrative, she started making mistakes that revealed the true scope of her criminal operations and the extent of her willingness to commit violence to protect them. The endgame was approaching, but I still didn't know whether Sophia would survive long enough to see her tormentors brought to justice. Maria's investigation team, working with reformed hackers from her underground network, successfully penetrated Carmen's supposedly secure computer systems and uncovered evidence that exceeded our worst fears about the scope of her criminal operations. The digital files revealed that Carmen had been operating an international adoption fraud scheme that sold false identities and stolen documents to wealthy Americans seeking to bypass legitimate adoption processes. She maintained detailed records of children who had been trafficked through her network, including photographs, medical records, and financial transactions related to their sales. "Your sister has been literally selling children for 15 years. Maria announced during an emergency video call, her voice shaking with rage and disgust. She has records of over 40 children who were removed from their families and sold to buyers who believed they were completing legal adoptions. The evidence showed that Carmen's adoption fraud network connected to her other criminal enterprises in horrifying ways. Children who aged out of the adoption market were sometimes transferred to human trafficking operations. Families who asked too many questions about adoption processes were eliminated using the same international abandonment techniques she'd used against Sophia. She's been documenting everything because she needs detailed records for her buyers." Maria continued as she described the contents of Carmen's files: birth certificates, medical histories, psychological evaluations, photographs showing the children in family settings to make them appear more appealing to potential adoptive parents. But the most devastating discovery concerned Carmen's long-term plans, for Sophia specifically. Her computer files contained detailed psychological profiles of family members, including assessments of their potential value as either criminal assets or threats requiring elimination. Sophia was never supposed to survive this trip, Maria revealed as she read from Carmen's planning documents. The abandonment was stage one of a plan to report her as killed by gang violence, allowing Carmen to collect insurance money while simultaneously gaining access to Sophia's identity documents for sale to her trafficking network. Carmen had taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Sophia 6 months before the Guatemala trip, listing herself as beneficiary based on her role as family matriarch and trustee of various family financial accounts. She had also obtained copies of Sophia's birth certificate, social security card, and other identity documents under the pretense of maintaining family records. The plan was to report Sophia's death after an appropriate interval, collect the insurance money, then sell her identity to criminal organizations who specialize in creating false backgrounds for trafficking victims. Maria explained her investigators' detachment, barely concealing her horror. The evidence also revealed that I had been targeted for elimination from the beginning. Carmen's files contained detailed plans for my own disappearance, designed to occur during my desperate attempts to rescue Sophia from Guatemala. You were supposed to travel to Guatemala looking for your daughter, then disappear yourself under circumstances that appeared to be either criminal involvement or random violence. Maria continued reading from Carmen's documents. Carmen had already prepared obituaries for both of you, complete with touching tributes to her beloved sister and niece, who were tragically lost to foreign violence. But the most shocking revelation concerned the scope of Carmen's previous victims. Her computer files contained records of similar operations targeting other family members over the past 2 decades, including detailed documentation of successful eliminations disguised as accident suicides or random crimes. Your cousin Derek wasn't abandoned in Mexico as a prank, Maria announced grimly. He was murdered by Carmen's associates after serving as an unwitting smuggling courier. The aunt you mentioned being left at the casino didn't die of natural causes. She was poisoned after discovering irregularities in family estate distributions. Carmen had been systematically murdering family members for years while maintaining her reputation as a successful businesswoman and devoted family matriarch. Each death generated insurance money, eliminated potential witnesses to her criminal activities, and provided cover stories that reinforced her image as someone who suffered tragic losses rather than caused them. She's documented at least 12 family members who were eliminated over the past 15 years. Maria continued, her voice growing more horrified as she reviewed the files. Grandparents whose estates she needed to control, cousins who asked questions about missing relatives, siblings who might have exposed her criminal activities. The evidence explained Patricia's loyalty to Carmen in a new and terrible context. My mother hadn't just been manipulated by Carmen's lies, she'd been systematically traumatized by witnessing the disappearances and deaths of family members she loved, then convinced that questioning Carmen's version of events might result in similar tragedies. Your mother has been living in terror for years, Maria realized as she found records of Carmen's psychological manipulation techniques. She's been cooperating with Carmen not because she believes her lies, but because she's seen what happens to family members who don't cooperate. But Carmen's obsessive record-keeping, which had protected her by providing detailed intelligence about her operations, was now becoming evidence that would destroy her. Every crime was documented. Every victim was cataloged. Every financial transaction was recorded. She kept everything because she needed to manage multiple criminal enterprises simultaneously, Maria explained. But that means we now have evidence of federal crimes spanning 2 decades involving hundreds of victims and generating millions of dollars in illegal profits. The investigation team discovered that Carmen was planning to fake her own death and escape to a non-extradition country, using stolen identity documents once she'd completed the elimination of remaining family witnesses. Sophia and I were to be her final victims before disappearing into a new life financed by decades of murder and fraud. She was 3 weeks away from vanishing forever, Maria announced as she finished reviewing the files. If we hadn't uncovered this evidence now, Carmen would have successfully committed the perfect series of crimes and escaped all consequences. But even with overwhelming evidence of Carmen's guilt, Sophia remained trapped in Guatemala City, while Carmen's criminal associates continued hunting for her with instructions to eliminate all witnesses to their employer's activities. Using intelligence gathered from Carmen's compromised computer files, Maria's underground network launched a coordinated operation to extract Sophia from Guatemala City before Carmen's associates could complete their assignment. Carlos and his team had identified a narrow window of opportunity created by rival gang conflicts that would temporarily disrupt the surveillance network hunting my daughter. Los Escorpiones are fighting with Mara Salvatrucha over territory that includes where Sophia is hiding, Carlos reported during our final planning call. Both gangs will be focused on each other for the next 6 hours, creating confusion we can exploit. The extraction route led through mountainous terrain controlled by a network of former trafficking victims who had banded together to help other endangered children escape Guatemala's criminal organizations. These survivors understood the psychology of hunted children and possessed intimate knowledge of secret pathways that avoided both gang territories and corrupt police checkpoints. Sophia has been moving constantly for 4 days, sleeping in different locations, every few hours drinking rainwater, and eating whatever scraps she can find, reported Elena, one of the rescue coordinators who had been tracking my daughter's movements. She's exhausted and dehydrated, but she's also shown remarkable intelligence about avoiding capture. Elena described how Sophia had been documenting everything she witnessed during her ordeal using a disposable camera she'd found in the abandoned textile factory. She'd been photographing gang members who were searching for her corrupt police officers, who were coordinating with Carmen's people and meetings between various criminal organizations involved in her case. Your daughter understood that surviving wasn't enough, Elena continued with admiration. She's been gathering evidence while running for her life, taking pictures of people and activities that could help expose the entire network trying to kill her. Sophia's intelligence gathering had been systematic and brave beyond her years. She'd overheard conversations between Carmen's associates and local criminals, learning details about payment structures, operational timelines, and backup plans for her elimination. She'd memorized license plate numbers, physical descriptions, and meeting locations that could provide crucial evidence for prosecuting everyone involved in her abandonment. She told me she wants these people prosecuted not just for what they did to her, but for what they've done to other children, Elena reported. She knows she's not their first victim, and she's determined to help make sure she's their last. The extraction itself was a harrowing chase across Guatemala's dangerous mountainous terrain. Sophia had been hiding in an abandoned church when Carmen's people finally located her, forcing her to flee through a cemetery and into dense forest while armed men pursued her on foot. She ran for 3 miles through jungle paths in the dark, following Elena's whispered directions through a radio Elena had given her. Carlos described the rescue operation. Gang members were maybe 50 yards behind her when she reached our extraction point. The rescue team included Elena and 4 other trafficking survivors who had risked their own safety to save a child they'd never met. They understood the desperation Sophia was experiencing because they'd lived through similar nightmares, and their determination to help her escape was both personal and fierce. These women have been hunted by the same type of criminals that were trying to kill your daughter, Maria explained as she described the rescue team. They know exactly how predators think and operate, which made them perfect guides for getting Sophia to safety. During the extraction, Sophia's documentation of her ordeal proved even more valuable than anyone had anticipated. The photographs she'd taken included images of Carmen's associates meeting with Guatemalan officials, providing visual evidence of the corruption that had made her abandonment possible. She photographed a meeting between the man who confiscated her passport and someone who appears to be Carmen's primary contact in Guatemala City. Elena reported as she reviewed Sophia's evidence. She also got pictures of money being exchanged and documents being signed that could prove official complicity in her endangerment. But the most shocking revelation came when Sophia shared what she'd overheard during her final night in hiding. Carmen's associates hadn't just been planning her immediate elimination. They'd been discussing the murders of other American children who had witnessed their criminal operations. She heard them talking about previous jobs, describing other kids who had been eliminated over the years. Elena continued. They were treating her case as routine business, comparing techniques they'd used to kill other children and discussing which methods were most effective for avoiding international investigation. Sophia's bravery in gathering this evidence while facing mortal danger demonstrated a maturity and moral courage that humbled everyone involved in her rescue. She deliberately allowed herself to remain in danger longer than necessary, because she understood that escaping without evidence would allow Carmen's network to continue targeting other children. I couldn't just run away and let them keep hurting other kids, Sophia later explained during her first safe phone call home. I knew Mom was trying to save me, but I also knew this might be the only chance to gather proof of what these people really do. The revelation that Sophia had deliberately used her abandonment as an opportunity to expose Carmen's criminal network recontextualized her entire ordeal. She hadn't just been a victim struggling to survive, she'd been an undercover investigator risking her life to protect other potential victims. Your daughter is braver than most adult law enforcement officers I've worked with, Carlos observed after reviewing all the evidence Sophia had collected. She understood the bigger picture and sacrificed her own immediate safety to help other children she'll never meet. But even as Sophia reached temporary safety with the rescue team, Carmen's criminal network was mobilizing additional resources to prevent her escape from Guatemala. The evidence she'd gathered made her an existential threat to operations that generated millions of dollars annually, and powerful people were willing to commit significant resources to silence her permanently. We're not safe yet, Elena warned during our celebration call. Carmen's people know Sophia escaped their immediate control, and they're organizing a much larger search operation with more resources and better coordination. The next phase of the rescue would require moving Sophia across international borders while avoiding detection by criminal organizations that had contacts throughout Central America's transportation and communication networks. Armed with overwhelming evidence from both Carmen's compromised computer files and Sophia's on-the-ground intelligence gathering, the FBI coordinated with international law enforcement agencies to launch simultaneous raids across multiple countries. The operation represented the largest takedown of an international child trafficking network in federal law enforcement history. This morning at 6 a.m., federal agents executed search warrants on 17 properties across 4 states connected to Carmen Whitfield's criminal enterprise, announced FBI Special Agent Rebecca Torres during a press conference that was broadcast internationally. We've also coordinated with law enforcement agencies in Guatemala, Mexico, and Colombia to arrest her foreign associates. The scope of the operation reflected the massive scale of Carmen's criminal activities. Her Beverly Hills mansion yielded evidence of artifacts, smuggling, money laundering, and document forgery operations. Her warehouse facilities contained stolen artwork, falsified adoption records, and sophisticated equipment for creating fraudulent identity documents. We discovered a room in Mrs. Whitfield's primary residence that contained detailed files on over 60 American children who were trafficked through her network. Agent Torres continued. Some of these children were reported as missing persons. Others were never reported missing because their disappearances were attributed to accidents or family disputes. Carmen's political connections, which had protected her for decades, abandoned her with stunning speed as the scope of her crimes became public. Congressional staff members who had provided her with information about international trade investigations suddenly claimed minimal contact with her. Former State Department officials who had facilitated her business relationships issued statements denying knowledge of her criminal activities. Politicians who were photographed at Carmen's fundraising events are now claiming they were deceived about the source of her wealth. Maria observed as we watched Carmen's protection network collapse in real time. People who accepted her campaign contributions for years are suddenly discovering they never really knew her. The international attention generated by Sophia's rescue forced immediate State Department intervention to extract her safely from Guatemala. Emergency protocols that had been impossible to activate when she was an abandoned child became available instantly when she became a federal witness whose testimony was crucial to prosecuting an international criminal organization. The same consular services that claimed they couldn't help an American minor without documentation managed to provide immediate assistance once she became important to a federal investigation, Maria noted with bitter irony. Sophia's value as a witness made her rescue a priority in ways her value as a human being never did. Bradley and Jasmine were arrested at their respective college campuses, their interrogations revealing additional details about Carmen's criminal operations and the extent of their personal involvement in targeting family members for elimination. Bradley confessed to participating in at least 6 previous family eliminations, disguised as accidents or disappearances, Agent Torres announced during a follow-up briefing. Jasmine provided detailed information about the adoption fraud network in exchange for reduced charges related to conspiracy and accessory charges. The arrests of Carmen's adult children created additional pressure for other family members who had participated in her operations or remained silent about her crimes. Cousins who had dismissed my concerns about Sophia's abandonment suddenly contacted federal agents offering information about Carmen's suspicious activities over the years. Uncle Robert called the FBI hotline yesterday offering to provide information about Carmen's involvement in our grandfather's suspicious death 10 years ago. I reported to Maria as family members began turning against Carmen to protect themselves from prosecution. Carmen's financial empire collapsed systematically as authorities traced money laundering operations through dozens of shell companies and offshore accounts. Properties purchased with proceeds from human trafficking were seized under federal asset forfeiture laws. Business partnerships built on criminal activities dissolved as legitimate partners discovered the true source of Carmen's wealth. She was maintaining parallel financial systems, Agent Torres explained during one of her briefings. Legitimate businesses that generated modest profits provided cover for criminal enterprises that generated millions of dollars through trafficking, smuggling, and fraud. The investigation revealed that Carmen had been systematically targeting successful family members for decades, using sophisticated psychological manipulation and financial pressure to isolate potential victims before eliminating them through methods that appeared accidental or self-inflicted. Mrs. Whitfield developed detailed psychological profiles of family members, identifying their vulnerabilities and exploiting them to maintain control over family dynamics. Agent Torres continued. She used family gatherings to gather intelligence about relatives' financial situations, personal relationships, and potential knowledge of her criminal activities. Patricia's cooperation with Carmen was revealed to be the result of years of psychological terrorism, rather than genuine belief in Carmen's version of events. FBI psychologists who interviewed my mother discovered that Carmen had been systematically threatening her with violence against other family members if she failed to provide information or support. Your mother was essentially held hostage by Carmen's threats against you and Sophia, Agent Torres explained to me during a private briefing. Carmen convinced her that questioning her activities would result in tragic accidents befalling family members she loved. The depth of Carmen's psychological manipulation extended to elaborate schemes for gaslighting relatives who became suspicious of her activities. She had created false evidence of family members' mental instability, fabricated medical records suggesting psychological problems, and orchestrated interventions designed to discredit anyone who might expose her crimes. She spent 15 years convincing your extended family that you were unstable and unreliable, specifically to prepare for this moment. Agent Torres continued. When you reported Sophia's abandonment, family members dismissed your concerns because Carmen had spent years undermining your credibility. But Carmen's obsessive need to document and control every aspect of her criminal operations had created a comprehensive record of her guilt that made prosecution inevitable. federal prosecutors announced they were seeking life sentences without parole for human trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, and racketeering charges. Mrs. Whitfield's own records provide detailed evidence of her criminal activities spanning 2 decades, announced federal prosecutor James Mitchell. She documented her crimes so thoroughly that prosecuting this case will be primarily a matter of presenting her own evidence to a jury. The investigation also uncovered Carmen's escape plan, which would have allowed her to disappear into a new identity, while leaving behind a trail of murdered family members and traumatized survivors. She was 3 weeks away from faking her own death and vanishing to a country without extradition treaties, Agent Torres revealed. If Sophia's rescue operation had failed, Mrs. Whitfield would have successfully committed dozens of perfect murders and escaped all consequences. But the international media attention generated by Sophia's courage in gathering evidence while fleeing for her life had made such escape impossible, trapping Carmen in a web of her own criminal activities. Carmen's arrest occurred at Los Angeles International Airport as she attempted to board a private jet bound for a non-extradition country. Her luggage, containing multiple fraudulent passports and over $2 million in cash generated by decades of criminal activity. Mrs. Carmen Whitfield was taken into custody without incident at approximately 11:30 p.m., announced FBI Special Agent Torres. She was carrying false identification documents and attempting to flee the country using assets derived from human trafficking and murder. The federal charges against Carmen included racketeering conspiracy to commit murder, human trafficking money, laundering fraud, and international kidnapping. Each charge carried potential life sentences, and prosecutors announced their intention to seek the maximum penalties allowed under federal law. This case represents one of the most extensive family-based criminal enterprises in federal law enforcement history, declared U.S. Attorney General Patricia Williams during a nationally televised press conference. Mrs. Whitfield exploited family relationships and international travel to commit crimes that destroyed dozens of lives over 2 decades. Carmen's arrest triggered a cascade of additional investigations as other law enforcement agencies discovered connections between her criminal network and unsolved cases involving missing children, suspicious deaths, and international adoption fraud in their jurisdictions. We are reviewing over 200 missing person cases and suspicious deaths that may be connected to Mrs. Whitfield's criminal activities, Agent Torres announced. Her detailed records suggest involvement in crimes across multiple states and several foreign countries. Bradley and Jasmine faced adult charges for their participation in conspiracy accessory to murder and human trafficking. Their interrogations revealed the casual nature with which they had participated in targeting family members for elimination, treating murder as entertainment rather than recognizing the gravity of their actions. These individuals treated the systematic elimination of family members as a family business, Prosecutor Mitchell explained during their arraignment. They participated in planning and executing murders with the same casual attitude most people reserve for planning family vacations. The evidence gathered by Sophia during her ordeal proved instrumental in identifying and prosecuting corrupt Guatemalan officials who had facilitated Carmen's operations. Her photographs and audio recordings provided crucial evidence for international prosecutions that extended far beyond Carmen's immediate network. Sophia's bravery in documenting criminal activities while running for her life has enabled prosecutions in 3 countries, Agent Torres announced. Her evidence has led to the arrest of 12 foreign officials and the exposure of corruption networks that enabled child trafficking operations throughout Central America. Other families began coming forward with stories of suspicious deaths and disappearances involving Carmen, creating a comprehensive picture of her criminal activities that spanned decades and affected hundreds of victims. We have received reports from over 40 families describing suspicious circumstances surrounding the deaths or disappearances of relatives who had contact with Mrs. Whitfield, Agent Torres revealed. Her method of operation was consistent across multiple cases, suggesting these crimes were carefully planned and systematically executed. Carmen's assets valued at over $15 million were seized under federal asset forfeiture laws and designated for victim compensation funds. Properties purchased with proceeds from trafficking were liquidated with proceeds distributed to families of victims and organizations that provided services to trafficking survivors. Every asset Mrs. Whitfield accumulated through criminal activity will be used to provide restitution to her victims and support services for trafficking survivors, announced Prosecutor Mitchell. Her wealth, which was built on the suffering of children and families, will now be used to help heal the damage she caused. The legislative impact of Sophia's case extended beyond individual prosecutions to systemic changes in how American authorities protect minors traveling internationally. Her testimony before congressional subcommittees led to new protocols for tracking American children abroad and responding to abandonment situations. Sophia's courage in gathering evidence and testifying about her experiences has inspired changes that will protect other children from similar situations, announced Congresswoman Maria Rodriguez, who chaired the Subcommittee on International Child Protection. Her ordeal has created safeguards that may prevent other families from experiencing such devastating betrayal. The corrupt Guatemalan officials who had assisted Carmen's network were prosecuted by their own government under intense international pressure. The evidence Sophia had gathered provided irrefutable proof of official complicity in child endangerment that could not be ignored or covered up. The photographs your daughter took of meetings between American criminals and Guatemalan officials forced our government to acknowledge corruption we might otherwise have overlooked, announced Guatemalan Attorney General Carlos Mendez. Her evidence made denial impossible and prosecution mandatory. Carmen's attempt to manipulate the legal system through her political connections backfired spectacularly, as those same connections became evidence of the systematic corruption that had enabled her crimes. Former allies distanced themselves so aggressively that their denials actually reinforced the scope of her criminal influence. Politicians and officials who had maintained relationships with Mrs. Whitfield found themselves under investigation for potential complicity in her criminal activities. Agent Torres explained. Their eagerness to distance themselves from her actually confirmed the extent of her political influence and corruption. But during Carmen's arrest, investigators discovered evidence of an even more chilling aspect of her criminal planning. Hidden in her luggage were detailed profiles of potential future victims, including photographs and personal information about other family members' children who might have eventually become targets for her adoption fraud network. Mrs. Whitfield's escape kit contained what can only be described as a target list for future criminal operations, Agent Torres revealed. She was planning to continue her criminal activities in a new location, with new victims suggesting these crimes would have continued indefinitely if she hadn't been stopped. The discovery that Carmen viewed her criminal activities as a lifelong career rather than a temporary means of accumulating wealth demonstrated the necessity of the life sentences prosecutors were seeking. Sophia's return to American soil occurred under circumstances dramatically different from her terrifying departure 6 weeks earlier. Instead of being an abandoned victim, she was welcomed as a federal witness whose courage had exposed an international criminal network and saved countless other children from similar fates. Coming home felt surreal because I was a completely different person than when I left, Sophia reflected during her first interview with American media. I went to Guatemala as a naive 16-year-old who trusted family members completely. I came back understanding that sometimes the most dangerous people are those closest to you. The physical and emotional scars from her ordeal were evident, but hadn't broken her spirit. She had lost 15 pounds during her time in hiding, suffered from nightmares and anxiety attacks, but demonstrated remarkable resilience and determination to use her experience to help other victims. I could have just focused on recovering and trying to forget what happened, Sophia explained. But I kept thinking about other kids who might go through what I went through, and I realized I had a responsibility to make sure Carmen's network couldn't hurt anyone else. Her testimony before Congress was both heartbreaking and inspiring, as she described the terror of being hunted while simultaneously gathering evidence that could save other children. Her poise and articulate description of systematic criminal exploitation earned standing ovations from representatives who rarely agreed on anything. Ms. Hartley's testimony has provided crucial insights into how international criminal networks exploit American families, announced Congressman Robert Chen, ranking member of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime and Federal Government Surveillance. Her recommendations for protecting American minors abroad will be incorporated into legislation currently being drafted. Sophia's advocacy work began immediately upon her return, as she connected with organizations that supported trafficking survivors and missing children. Her unique perspective as someone who had both escaped trafficking and gathered evidence against traffickers made her an invaluable resource for other survivors. She understands both the victim experience and the investigative process, observed Dr. Jennifer Walsh, director of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Sophia can help other survivors understand how their experiences can become tools for protecting additional children. The evidence Sophia had gathered during her ordeal proved instrumental in rescuing 12 other American children from various criminal enterprises connected to Carmen's network. Her documentation of criminal activities and corrupt official involvement provided roadmaps for international law enforcement operations. Sophia's photographs and recordings didn't just help prosecute the people who endangered her, Agent Torres announced during a press briefing. They provided intelligence that led to rescue operations in 4 countries and the identification of trafficking routes that had operated undetected for years. Maria Santos became like a surrogate aunt to Sophia, their friendship forged through shared trauma and triumph over international criminal networks. Together, they developed protocols for helping other families navigate similar crisis situations. Maria taught me that surviving trauma isn't enough if you have the ability to prevent other people from experiencing similar trauma. Sophia explained during one of their joint speaking engagements, "We both understand that our painful experiences become meaningless unless we use them to protect others." The relationship between Sophia and me deepened through our shared ordeal in ways that might never have developed under normal circumstances. The experience of fighting for her life while she fought for other children's lives created bonds that transcended typical parent-child dynamics. Mom and I became partners in a way most parents and teenagers never experience, Sophia observed. We learned that we could trust each other completely under the worst possible circumstances, which makes normal family challenges seem much easier to handle. Her academic performance, rather than suffering from her traumatic experience, actually improved as she gained new perspective on the importance of education and personal development. She began studying international law and criminal justice, with the focused intensity of someone who understood these subjects weren't abstract concepts, but tools for protecting vulnerable people. "I want to become the kind of prosecutor who can take down criminal networks like Carmen's," Sophia announced during a career day presentation at her high school. "I've seen how these organizations operate, and I want to spend my life making sure they can't hurt other families." The family members who had abandoned me during the crisis faced public shame and private guilt as the truth about Carmen's criminal activities became public knowledge. Some attempted reconciliation, while others remained defensive about their complicity in nearly enabling my daughter's murder. People who dismissed my concerns about Sophia's abandonment are now trying to rewrite history to make themselves appear more supportive than they actually were. I observed during a family therapy session designed to address the extensive damage Carmen's manipulation had caused to family relationships. Patricia's journey toward understanding how she had been manipulated and used was particularly painful as she realized her cooperation with Carmen had nearly resulted in losing both her daughter and granddaughter to a serial killer. "I was so afraid of Carmen that I convinced myself she was protecting the family rather than destroying it," Patricia explained during one of our reconciliation conversations. "I thought cooperating with her was keeping everyone safe, but I was actually helping her eliminate the people I loved most. But the most meaningful aspect of Sophia's recovery was her decision to maintain relationships with the trafficking survivors who had risked their lives to save her. Elena and the other women who had guided her to safety became extended family members who understood her experience in ways no one else could. These women saved my life, but more than that, they showed me what it means to transform survival into service, Sophia reflected. They could have focused on their own healing, but instead they chose to help other victims, and that taught me what real strength looks like. 2 years after Sophia's rescue, the victim compensation funds and book deal proceeds from our story had enabled us to establish the Sophia Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to rescuing abandoned American minors internationally and prosecuting family members who exploit children for criminal purposes. We process about 50 cases per month involving American children who are endangered by family members abroad, I explained during the Foundation's second annual fundraising gala. Sophia's experience taught us that traditional diplomatic channels often move too slowly to save children facing immediate danger, so we've developed alternative networks that can respond within hours rather than weeks. The Foundation's success reflected both the unfortunate prevalence of family-based child endangerment and the effectiveness of the rescue protocols we'd developed through our own traumatic experience. Our underground networks, inherited from Maria's contacts, had evolved into a sophisticated international operation with connections in over 30 countries. What makes our organization different is that we understand both the victim experience and the criminal methods being used against children. Sophia explained during her keynote address at an international conference on child trafficking. We can anticipate how family-based criminal networks operate because we've survived their methods personally. My decision to return to school for international law had been motivated by our shared commitment to preventing other families from experiencing similar betrayal and abandonment. The legal education I gained provided tools for navigating international jurisdictions and understanding how criminal organizations exploit legal system weaknesses. Isabella's combination of personal experience and legal training makes her uniquely qualified to help other families who are facing international child endangerment, observed Professor David Martinez, who supervised my thesis on family-based trafficking networks. She understands both the emotional trauma and legal complexities involved in these cases. Sophia's academic excellence in high school had earned her early admission to several prestigious universities, where she planned to study investigative journalism and victim advocacy. Her goal was to combine Maria's investigative skills with her own survivor perspective to expose criminal networks before they could harm children. I want to identify and investigate family-based criminal networks before they eliminate victims, Sophia explained during her college admission interviews. Prevention is more effective than rescue, and my experience taught me to recognize warning signs that might save other children from going through what I survived. Patricia's journey toward healing required extensive therapy to address decades of psychological manipulation and trauma inflicted by Carmen's systematic abuse of family relationships. Her recovery process helped other family members understand how they had been manipulated and used. Recognizing that Carmen was essentially holding us hostage through threats and manipulation helped explain why so many family members failed to support Isabella when Sophia was in danger, Patricia explained during a family therapy session. We weren't choosing Carmen over Isabella. We were choosing what we thought was family survival over family justice. The extended family members who had eventually supported our rescue efforts were welcomed back into our lives, while those who continued to defend Carmen's actions or minimize her crimes were excluded from our recovery process. Healing from family betrayal requires establishing boundaries with people who either participated in the betrayal or refused to acknowledge its reality, observed Dr. Sarah Thompson, the family therapist who guided our recovery process. Forgiveness doesn't mean accepting continued manipulation or denial. Maria's friendship became one of the most valuable relationships to emerge from our traumatic experience. Our shared understanding of international child endangerment and rescue operations created a partnership that extended far beyond our initial crisis. Maria showed me that surviving trauma creates obligations to help other people avoid similar trauma. I reflected during one of our joint speaking engagements. Our friendship is built on the understanding that our painful experiences only become meaningful if we use them to protect other families. The Sophia Foundation's success in developing rapid response protocols for international child rescue had attracted attention from federal law enforcement agencies seeking to improve their own response capabilities. The Foundation's ability to coordinate international rescue operations within hours rather than days has provided a model for improving official diplomatic responses to child endangerment cases, announced State Department spokesperson Jennifer Adams. Their methods are being studied for potential integration into official protocols. Sophia's decision to maintain close relationships with the trafficking survivors who had saved her life created an extended support network that understood both the trauma and triumph aspects of her experience. Elena and the other women who guided me to safety understand parts of my experience that even Mom can't fully comprehend, Sophia explained. They know what it feels like to be hunted by professional killers, and they know what it takes to transform that experience into strength that helps other people. But the most significant aspect of our healing process was the recognition that our shared trauma had created unbreakable bonds and clarified our life purposes in ways that might never have emerged under normal circumstances. Before Guatemala, I was focused on normal teenage concerns, like college applications and social dynamics. Sophia reflected during a therapy session. After Guatemala, I understood that some people dedicate their lives to protecting vulnerable children, and I wanted to become one of those people. Our recovery process demonstrated that surviving family betrayal and international criminal targeting could become a foundation for helping other families rather than a source of permanent damage. Isabella and Sophia have transformed their trauma into a resource that has saved dozens of other children from similar situations, observed Dr. Thompson. Their healing process proves that even the most devastating betrayals can become sources of strength when survivors choose service over self-pity. 4 years after our nightmare in Guatemala, I stood at the podium of the newly dedicated International Child Protection Center in Washington, D.C., surrounded by families we had helped reunite and survivors who had transformed their trauma into advocacy for other victims. The center represented everything Sophia and I had learned about turning devastating betrayal into meaningful service. Today we dedicate this facility to every child who has been endangered by people who were supposed to protect them. I announced to the gathered audience of survivors, advocates, and law enforcement officials. This center exists because my daughter Sophia chose courage over safety evidence gathering over immediate escape and service to others over personal recovery. Sophia had graduated high school as valedictorian and was completing her second year studying investigative journalism at Georgetown University, while maintaining her advocacy work with trafficking survivors. Her academic achievements reflected the focused intensity of someone who understood that education was a tool for protecting vulnerable people, rather than an abstract personal goal. Everything I study, from international law to investigative techniques to victim psychology, is preparation for dismantling criminal networks that exploit children, Sophia explained during her keynote address at the center's dedication ceremony. My education isn't about personal advancement, it's about developing skills that can save other kids from experiencing what I experienced. My own law school graduation had been followed by immediate employment with the Department of Justice's Human Trafficking Prosecution Unit, where my combination of personal experience and legal training made me uniquely qualified to prosecute family-based criminal networks. Isabella's understanding of how criminal organizations exploit family relationships provides insights that have revolutionized our approach to these cases, announced Assistant Attorney General Maria Rodriguez. Her prosecution strategies have resulted in convictions that were previously impossible to achieve. Carmen's trial had concluded with multiple life sentences, without possibility of parole effectively ending her criminal career and dismantling the international network she had built over decades. Bradley and Jasmine were serving 30-year sentences for their participation in conspiracy and accessory charges, their college dreams permanently replaced by federal prison cells. Mrs. Whitfield's conviction represents justice not only for her direct victims, but for every family that has been torn apart by criminals who exploit trust and love for profit, announced federal prosecutor James Mitchell during a press conference following the sentencing. These crimes attack the foundation of family relationships and social trust. The broader impact of our case had extended far beyond individual prosecutions to systemic changes in how international law enforcement agencies coordinate responses to child endangerment situations. Protocols developed through our foundation were being implemented by governments worldwide. The Hartley-Santos Protocols for International Child Rescue have been adopted by 23 countries as standard procedures for responding to family-based child endangerment cases, announced United Nations Special Rapporteur on Child Trafficking, Dr. Elena Vasquez. These procedures have directly resulted in the rescue of over 300 children in the past 2 years. Maria continued her investigative journalism while serving as the Foundation's international coordinator, using her network of contacts to identify and expose criminal organizations before they could harm children. Our partnership had evolved from crisis collaboration to systematic prevention efforts. Maria taught me that the most effective way to help victims is to prevent victimization by exposing criminal networks before they can operate. I reflected during a joint interview about our ongoing work. Investigation and prosecution work together to create consequences for people who exploit children. Patricia's recovery from decades of psychological manipulation had enabled her to become an advocate for other family members who had been manipulated by criminal relatives. Her willingness to share her own experience of being victimized and used helped other people recognize similar patterns in their own families. Understanding how Carmen controlled and manipulated me for years helped me recognize that I wasn't complicit in her crimes. I was another type of victim. Patricia explained during a support group meeting for families affected by criminal relatives. Healing requires distinguishing between responsibility for our own actions and responsibility for criminal behavior we were manipulated into enabling. The families we had helped through the foundation created an extended community of survivors who understood that trauma could become a source of strength when channeled toward protecting other people from similar experiences. Every family we help adds to our understanding of how criminal networks operate and how they can be defeated, observed Foundation board member Dr. Jennifer Walsh. Our community of survivors has become a resource that criminal organizations cannot anticipate or counter. Sophia's relationship with Elena and the other trafficking survivors who had saved her life continued to provide support and perspective that no traditional counseling could offer. Their friendship represented proof that surviving international criminal targeting could create bonds stronger than biological family relationships. Elena and the other women who risked their lives to save me understand aspects of survival and strength that most people never need to learn. Sophia reflected during our final family therapy session. They showed me that trauma doesn't have to define your life, but it can definitely direct your purpose. As I looked out at the audience gathered for the center's dedication, I realized that our nightmare in Guatemala had transformed into something Carmen never could have anticipated when she planned our elimination. Instead of destroying our family, her betrayal had revealed our strength and connected us with hundreds of other families fighting similar battles. Carmen believed that isolating and terrorizing families would allow her to commit crimes without consequences. I continued my dedication speech, but she underestimated the power of survivors to connect with each other and transform their pain into protection for other vulnerable people. The life lesson that emerged from our ordeal wasn't about forgiveness or moving on from trauma, but about recognizing that some experiences, however painful, create obligations to prevent other people from suffering similar harm. Before Guatemala, I thought family meant automatic trust and loyalty. I concluded. After Guatemala, I learned that real family means people who choose to protect each other, even when that protection requires sacrifice and courage. Sophia's courage in choosing evidence gathering over immediate safety had saved not only her own life, but dozens of other children who were rescued using intelligence she provided. Her decision to transform survival into service had created a model for other young people who wanted to use their experiences to help others. The most important thing Guatemala taught me is that surviving isn't enough if you have the ability to prevent other people from experiencing what you survived, Sophia announced during her portion of the dedication ceremony. Real healing happens when your trauma becomes someone else's protection. As we concluded the dedication ceremony, I reflected on how Carmen's systematic betrayal had inadvertently connected us with a community of advocate survivors and law enforcement professionals who understood that protecting children requires both courage and cooperation. Our nightmare had ended, but our mission was just beginning. Every child we helped escape dangerous situations proved that love and determination could overcome even the most malicious betrayal, and every criminal network we helped dismantle demonstrated that survivors could become more powerful than the people who had tried to destroy them. What's your take on family loyalty versus protecting innocent children when the two come into conflict? Have you ever faced a situation where doing the right thing required standing up to family members? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe for more stories about courage overcoming betrayal, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear that survival can become strength. Thank you for joining Sophia and me on this journey from nightmare to purpose. Remember that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to protect others and create meaning from our pain.